Hey everybody, this is Jill Marie, Coach Jill Marie, and I am with Dan Pickle. How you doing?
Hello. Good, good, good.
So Dan and I work with people in all sorts of capacities, and today we want to talk about trauma. We are transformation specialists, and we love what we do, and we have excellent results in surprising, unique ways. But we don't want to really talk about the how of what we do. We really want to talk about a little bit with trauma and then maybe the results that people get with us and a little bit of education around it. So, um, what are your thoughts about trauma, Dan? Like trauma, PTSD, and the people that see you. What kinds of things are they coming to you for?
Uh, all kinds of traumas, whether it's a lot of it's mostly childhood stuff, 0 to 6, right? Sometimes it's car accidents, horrible interactions with bosses, being fired, breakups. Uh, there's all sorts of traumas people come to me with. Some of them are real big ones. Some of them are more run-of-the-mill things that aren't as unique, that are sort of things we all kind of experience. Um, and everyone sort of holds their trauma differently, the way they play it, store it, keep it alive, right? So some people will have a more normal everyday experience and will focus on it so much that it just builds and builds and builds and gets bigger and bigger. So trauma is just very fascinating for me. It's
It
different for every,
is.
yeah.
Yeah, and it is. And it's really the perception of how you feel the trauma is. I mean, granted, we could step back and say, if there was a rollover car accident, probably majority of people would say, yeah, that sounds traumatic.
Mhm.
But sometimes there are things that aren't as obvious to be trauma, but they are traumatic to the person who experienced them. So, you know, we could call them, a big T trauma or a little T trauma. And it's all a matter of the perception of the person and how they have it in their head and what they think about it, what they believe about it, what they feel about it, not what society says or labels. Because sometimes people have been in a situation where they've done a lot of work on themselves and it's really not a trauma anymore, or they're not holding it as bad. Because you could take 10 people and have them look at the same horrific incident, and there would be 10 different perceptions about that just from an outsider's perspective. So the same thing happens, I think, within us.
Yeah.
And the thing about trauma too, which Dan and I were talking about before we started recording, is there's so many different ways that people cope with trauma. And sometimes we don't even know that we have a trauma in our past, but we're coping with something, and maybe we don't want to call it trauma, but it's something that's bothering us, so we're coping. And some of those things are like drugs and alcohol, or um, addictions. You know, what are some other things that you notice with the trauma and how people cope?
Um, Avoidance is real common through either drugs, alcohol, or through um, staying busy, like
Mhm.
trying to always stay active in their mind or in their body, because they don't want to sort of settle down and afraid of facing it, I think is part of that. Um, Most commonly, I see people, they try to put it behind a wall in their head, like wall it off, shut it away, don't talk about it, don't think about it, um, as a way to cope with it. But it's always there. You can't escape it. If you
Right.
don't get it out, it's always there to be in the background and sort of puppet you and your experiences with people and your reactions to life. It's always there to sort of steal your emotional control and emotional maturity in moments, right? Um, and then I think the other thing people do is they will just talk about it a lot. And I think it's good to talk about it to some degree, but there comes that fine line where talking to release the energy or tension of it becomes sort of rehearsing it and ingraining it and making it worse. So it's interesting, all the different things we do. And we don't know how, people don't know how to take care of their traumas. We're not taught this in school. You're not taught it by parents, generally speaking. And so we walk around these sort of hurt people, hurting other people, and we all have our own little traumas, things we're trying to cope with. And there's really no effective way to cope, in my opinion, except get rid of it. And then you don't need
Yeah.
to cope because it's not there anymore. But
Right.
that coping is such a trap because it does feel better in a moment, right? But
And it seems like you're doing something productive, like going to a support group, like, oh, I'm being productive. I'm actually tackling my trauma. But really, to me, support groups, and I've thought this for years, that you're just supporting the problem. You are supporting it and keeping it alive. You're talking with other people who are completely buying into your story and they're helping you believe it too, even more. And you're rehearsing it and sharing it. And yeah, it's just to me, I've not been a fan of support groups for years and years.
yeah. And then what I see too, because I'll like kind of see support groups online, or I'll talk to clients who are in support groups, and they'll say things like PTSD is a life sentence. It's always going to be there. Trauma is always going to be there.
Yes, those beliefs are killers, like for
It's
real.
awful. It's awful.
Yeah, and that is the thing. So, like, I would say, Dan and I would like you to know that that's not true. You
Yeah.
don't have to live with your trauma forever. You don't have to make it bother you for the rest of your life. You don't have to put it in a container and put it on a shelf and hold it there and store it like a keepsake. Because to me, that's
Exactly.
kind of what you're doing. Like, oh, this is my souvenir from my incident. Because sometimes
From
people
my
do.
childhood.
I know, and I'm not
Horrible.
making light of it. So like someone who's listening might get triggered by the fact that I just said that, but the truth is that's kind of what we're doing.
And we
We're
all
putting it
do
up there
that.
on a shelf. Like I'm gonna look at this every once in a while and remind myself because isn't that what we do with keepsake boxes? We keep the road from the corsage of the event, or we keep the card that we got because it's nice to look and remember those things. But we're doing the same thing in our head when we're taking those memories that we don't like and putting them in a box somewhere. And sometimes you're like, oh, don't touch that box. It's like you're fooling yourself if you think you're never looking in that box because your subconscious never sleeps. It's always accessing things and including that box that you think is up there tucked away and no one's touching.
Yeah, that is exactly how it works.
Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to say with what you were talking about regarding the ways people cope in, and you said they talk about it a lot, is what we do is not talk therapy. And there's a lot of counseling out there and a lot of therapists. And, and if that works for you, great. But in my experience, it hasn't worked for me. And I have gone through therapy, different therapists, I've tried different things, and it hasn't worked. Coaching has definitely worked for me. And in in what Dan and I do, we go for the root cause. That's been my goal for my whole career of coaching is get to the root of the issue. A lot of people swim around at the surface for whatever reason. They want to get those symptoms taken care of. You're feeling bad. Let's get you to feel good right now. But what if we, push those symptoms aside, look below, and get to what the root of that is? Wouldn't that be great? So then you don't have to relive the trauma subconsciously in your mind anymore. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be there as a badge of honor anymore. You don't have to look at it that way. I told somebody recently about trauma that because she was telling me how I'm still working through my trauma. I'm really trying to understand it, and I said, sometimes really just letting the trauma go is more important than understanding it
Yeah.
because we can understand things till the nth degree or try, but our brains are so complex, you're really never going to understand what's going on in there now and what it's doing to cope.
But I think that that's part of the thing is that people think if I understand it logically,
Mm-hmm.
I could change it and let it go. And it's a
Yes.
left-brained, conscious mind sort of way to try to address it when it's a subconscious problem. And so knowing why something happened doesn't change what happened, doesn't change how you hold it. And I think
Right.
that's where people get caught up in it because, well, if I understood it, but
And
it doesn't change it.
and they want us to understand it too. Like how many times have you had a client like, well, you just need to understand my whole story, so I got to
Exactly.
give you all the details. I have like I've been coaching for a long time, and clients always want to tell you their story because I think people have been trained that that's what you do. You have to
Well,
tell
they
someone.
rehearse it.
They
They
rehearse it, and
rehearse
then
it.
they rehearse it to you, and then
So
they
they
want
want to
you to
tell
in
you
on
how
it
they
with them.
rehearse it. Yeah.
And then sometimes I think as practitioners, it's hard not to buy into the story. So it's like, yeah, you know what? I don't need those details because if you already have them, and in order for us to help you with it, we don't need those details.
It's gonna be changed and removed. It's gonna go away. So there's no real point going into the muck and the mire of it. And that's a great thing because I think people when they want help with trauma, the last thing they want to do is be re-triggered. They don't want to be thrown into the deep end and flail and
Yeah.
panic and struggle, and then have you gradually coax them to the side of the pool, right? And so with what we do, that process doesn't happen. We don't. That doesn't happen with folks. It's very gentle. It's gradual, but it's quick.
Yeah, sometimes so subtle that they don't realize there was a
You
change,
don't.
but there
Yeah.
was when they realize it later, like, oh my gosh, that's true. That is what I told you in the beginning. And that is like, and we measure the change. So we have actual measurable change that we can show you how things have shifted.
And it's
And
that term that I struggle with, experiential. I can never say that word.
oh, experiential. Yeah.
Experiential. There you go. You know right away what's changing. Sometimes it is amnesic, like it's subtle. And so you might not know until the next day sometimes. But as we go through the process, generally speaking, what's changing right away. There's no question. You see it, you feel it, you hear it, everything starts to feel better. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's our goal is so you feel better and not just today and tomorrow, but sustainable change for sustainable feeling good. Not like the seminar you went to that was all empowering for the weekend, but then you go
Yeah.
home and you're back in your own usual environment doing your usual things and then feeling the usual way before that seminar.
Yep.
Because our goal is to change that for you so that you actually are feeling good and having the behaviors that you want. And just so you know, Dan and I do work virtually. So we work with people anywhere in the world, time zones aligning, of course. And so we'll put our contact below for you so you can reach out to us if it's interesting to you to have a consult or see what we could do to help you with the trauma that you're dealing with. And also, it's probably exciting to let them know that we are going to be doing group transformation sessions coming up here.
Yes.
So we're
Yeah.
pretty excited about that. Go ahead.
Very excited about that. So it'll be us with the group. You share what you feel comfortable sharing. You don't need to share details. Again, it's not therapy, talk therapy. As long as you know how it bothers you, that's really all we need to work with. Break off into different rooms, work with people, trade off. Jill will break off with other people I've worked with and come back together and notice differences and changes.
Yeah, we're going to learn a lot together doing this. It's going to be it's going to be experiential, like Dan said. And there'll be a lot of, the thing about this experiential learning is awesome because it's a 90% retention rate of the learning that occurred. So not only are you going to learn some things, but you're also going to let go of some things. And also the bonus will be leaving feeling really good. That's sustainable. So that's our goal. So more to come on that, more details when we get our groups lined up for you. And we look forward to sharing more with you.
Exactly.
Anything else you want to say, Dan?
I think we covered it. I'm looking forward to meeting people and helping them transform stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Looking forward to it too. All right. Thanks. See you guys later.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.